Hello everybody and welcome back to the 4th episode of KerVAM. Hopefully by now you know the deal. We're a Doctor Who podcast, but we don't talk just about the Doctor Who stories. We're here to celebrate and chat about the Doctor Who DVDs, Blu-rays, the VAM, the special features, everything about the physical media releases of Doctor Who rather than the actual stories themselves. Of course we do talk about the stories because, everybody wants to hear that, but we put more focus on, the special features, the animations, the collection Blu-ray releases, all those kind of things is what we're celebrating. And certainly we've got a host of that today with some news in the past week to discuss, and the incoming release of the Season 24 Blu-ray as well. So, of course, as always in this podcast, I'm joined by Charlie and Ryan. How are you guys doing? How are you getting on, Charlie?
Good, thanks. Yeah, I've to sort of prepare for this, then I've watched all of Season 24 through on DVD, along with lots of VAM as well. Ryan?
Yeah, I did the same thing. I've rewatched all the stories, and it's definitely an interesting ride through season 24, shall we say?
Yes, exactly. I think it's well. I think the general fan consensus is it's one of the worst seasons of Doctor Who. Whether that really rings true, I don't know. I think it's debatable, but that's certainly what the fans like to say about it. So today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about, firstly, the Web of Fear, because of course this week we got the announcement that, I guess about a week ago when you guys are listening to this, the announcement that the animation was going to be released on the 16th of August this year. So we've only got, that's a couple of months to wait now. Actually, after the last podcast, remember we chatted about how, we hadn't heard anything about it for about 7 months. And, did the animation company even exist? Suddenly we finally got the release date, we got the special features, but we also got a 3-minute clip from the animation, which was a sort of, a scene basically from the middle of the story. I haven't watched the story in a while, but it's a scene with the Brigadier and the Doctor, and they're all sort of sat in front of a screen basically discussing, I think, how they're going to escape the underground, because they're like stuck in there, aren't they? They're sort of trapped underground and trying to find their way out. And discussing about the Yetis and all this kind of thing. And so this 3-minute clip presents us with, a proper view of what the animation is going to look like. And I think it's fair to say, having, watched it and then looked at Twitter, looked at the forums, looked at the comments, it's not exactly been universally praised, I think it's fair to say. So, let's get straight into talking about the Web of Fear. So, Ryan, I'm guessing you watched this clip the other day. What were your first impressions when you sat down and watched this?
Well, I was just amazed that they managed to make a PlayStation 2-esque Doctor Who movie. I mean, it's my early fears about the animation are starting to ring true a little bit. I mean, there are some things. I mean, I think they got the color grading and the background's well done. I think it's just the character movements and the faces are just off-putting. I don't know what it is. It just feels so weird. And it's got me very, very concerned indeed.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie, I'm guessing you also had a chance to watch it. Were you as, disappointed maybe as Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely. I did not like it. The character movements, they're not the best, but just the general style of it, I'm really not a fan of it. That's pretty much just what Ryan said.
Yeah, it's weird because I think it's fair to say that a lot of the previous animations are more 2D animation in style, whereas they seem to have gone for this very kind of 3D, as Ryan described, like PlayStation 2 game style modelling of the characters. And I just feel like you look at the sort of the characters and they just don't really look that much like the Brigadier, for example. I didn't really look anything like the Brigadier. Well, I guess he's Colonel Lethbridge Stewart at this point, but that's beside the point. I don't really feel like he looks anything like the character, which isn't fantastic. I do agree. I think, Ryan, you mentioned that the actual sort of the kind of colouring and the lighting and everything is actually quite good. And I thought particularly actually in black and white, I think it personally worked better because it sort of transitioned halfway through the clip from the 16:9 colour version to the 4:3 black and white version, which is probably the version I'd go to more often, particularly as we've got 5 black and white episodes around it. I personally am probably more inclined to watch that sort of black and white version in context with the rest of it. And I thought that, the sort of, the lighting wise, I think it worked in black and white in particular, it worked actually quite effectively. It just, as you guys say, the modelling and the movements of the characters were just so, bizarre. and so just so very different, I think, to anything we've seen before in animated Doctor Who. I mean, Ryan, do you think there's any other animations we can really compare it to? Even something like, I don't know, Dreamland or something. Do you think there's anything we can compare it to?
It is very kind of similar to Dreamland in terms of the character movements and animation, that very sort of stiff, sort of PlayStation 2-esque animation, which it just leaves me wondering why they just didn't bother to go with the 2D animation, since it worked so really well in the past few years with like Sharda, Power of the Daleks, Macroter, and so on. It just feels weird that they would try something like this, as opposed to doing something that worked really well before.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, yeah, Charlie, what's your sort of thoughts on that?
This may sound a bit strange, but I first, like, immediately after like 2 seconds of seeing this, I immediately thought 3D version of the Reign of Terror animation. I feel like it has the same sort of feel as that, which, as we discussed in episode 2, isn't exactly an amazing thing. That said, I'm glad. That said, I'm glad they tried something different. Like if 3D becomes the norm for these animations, by the time we get into Hartnell's era and we have a lot more of them, then they may be able to perfect that. And if 3D animation looks good, it can look really good.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting because we note that it's a new. I think it was Sun and Moon Studios. I think was the name of the new production company animation company that are doing this release. And whether it's the BBC who've asked them to do a 3D animation version of this essentially, or whether the company themselves have kind of approached it with this is the style we do. Is that okay, kind of thing? And yeah, you'd have to imagine that they will improve over time. And you never know. Maybe when we watch the actual thing, it won't be quite so bad. Maybe it'll be a bit more refined. But also, because I saw some people talking about this, and I kind of agreed to an extent. I remember, I think it was when they announced it, wasn't it? They released the little teaser showing the sort of trailer where you have Patrick Troughton kind of stood there with sort of just making some lines about being in the underground and stuff. And I almost thought actually that almost looked better than what we got in the clip that we got most recently. It was sort of, it almost felt like, that this felt like an earlier draft almost than what we'd already been shown in the previous trailer. So maybe it's just that this wasn't the greatest scene to showcase it. I don't know. But then why would you pick this scene to try and basically advertise your release if, it's not really that fantastic? I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I'm not too sure either. I do agree. It does feel like the first trailer we got was definitely a more refined version of the trailer we got just a week ago. But yeah, I mean, it remains to be unknown. I'm still going to get the release because, just out of curiosity, really. But I suppose we'll just have to wait and see, really.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, of course, I'm definitely going to buy it because Web of Fear is one of my favourite stories and one of the best of the Patrick Troughton era. I think it's amazing. And I mean, I was always curious as to how they were going to do an animated version of Part 3 if they were going to do it. But I'm still very skeptical about the animation after seeing both the trailer and the clip of it. I mean, I probably would have been fine if there was more character expressions and much more smoother character animation movement. I probably would have accepted the 3D animation more, but see what we've got so far, I've got some concerns.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's the majority of people, I think, would say they've got some concerns just looking at, the evidence that we've got before us at the moment. And maybe that'll change. Maybe it will improve when we get the final thing. But, we can't help but be a little bit cynical and skeptical, I guess, sometimes. But in the same way, we also, as we say, we're all going to buy this release. We're all really excited for it still, despite the fact that, we don't think the animation's that great because we love Doctor Who and we love that they're still choosing to do these things and animate these episodes. Like, this has only got one missing episode, so it kind of works both ways. It's like they could have waited and held on to try and find the mysterious stolen episode 3. Philip Morris and all that going waffling on about how it was nicked. We'll probably never find out exactly what happened there. But, so we could have just held out for that, but they did decide to just go for it and animate this episode. And so I feel like it might, to an extent, in the long run, kind of just become the slightly forgotten animation because it's kind of in the middle of this great story where all the episodes exist. It almost may, become less important. It's just kind of, let's get through this part of it, the story, Yeah, sure, it's not that great, but it's better than a telesnap reconstruction. And, well, in my opinion, at least, it's better than a telesnap. I enjoy it more. And yeah, that may be how it's sort of more well remembered. So I think moving on from that, we also, of course, along with the release date in this clip, got a confirmation of the special features for this release, where we've got a making of documentary. I don't think we know whether it's, a good old Chris Chapman documentary or if somebody else is doing it. I don't think we've actually got I haven't seen anything about that personally. There's also a documentary about making the animation, so that's going to be fascinating to see. That might tell us why they've taken the creative decisions they have. We might find out the answers to that there, I think, which would be really interesting. Along with a trailer for the Web of Fear, the Many Voices of Jack Woolgar, which is some sort of documentary around, I think a fairly famous character actor called Jack Woolgar. I can't confess I know much about him and what he did. Obviously, he was in this story. He was the voice of the Great Intelligence, and I think was also a character, one of the sort of soldiers in the story. And so there's some sort of documentary about him. So the final feature on the Web of Fear Special Edition animation release is the Missing Years documentary, which is a new, but also not very new at all, documentary, because it was released back in 1998 on the VHS range originally. I think it was basically one of the first ever pieces of VAM on any sort of, release of Doctor Who. It was released on there and then re-released for the Lost in Time box set back in 2004, the sort of DVD set that had all the orphaned missing Doctor Who episodes, basically. And it just kind of covered off some of the early days of missing Doctor Who episodes, how they went missing, how they were found. Had a popular figure in the Doctor Who community, Ian Levine, come on and say that there's going to be 110 missing episodes of Doctor Who forever, which of course has already been proved wrong. And also I think had some clip, like the sort of famous 6.5 minute clip from Galaxy 4 was included in there, among other things, I think, as well, because that had never been seen anywhere before this documentary. So it'll be interesting to kind of have that sort of looking back, really, of seeing one of the very first pieces of VAM that was ever on a physical release, and being able to enjoy that, 23 years since they first made the documentary itself, which I think is just really cool personally. So for you guys, Ryan, what sort of are you most looking forward to on this release, apart from obviously the animation itself?
Well, I'm looking forward to the making of documentary about the animation, just to know what exactly the thought process was in terms of making the 3D animation, why they went with the creative direction they went with it, and just wondered how they managed to pull it off, basically. And I'm interested in seeing the Missing Years documentary, just to see if there's any changes, because by that point, as you said, they only updated it to include that missing episode of The Crusade and Dalek's Mars Band. And of course, we've had plenty of lost episodes recovered since then, so it'd be interesting to see if they go back and update that and reveal a bit more about how they were found.
Yeah, exactly. I it would seem they did it for 2004 for that version of it. It'd be I think it'd just be quite nice and quite fitting if they did another little sort of 5-minute addendum, just going, oh yeah, since then, we've got another episode of Galaxy 4. I think it was an episode of Underwater Menace, and obviously Enemy and Web as well after that. But yeah, Charlie, what about you? What are you most excited for this release, would you say?
Basically what you and Ryan have said. Like the making of for the animation. Obviously, I'm really curious as to whether they're going to address the sort of negative criticism it got. Maybe, I don't know how late it's filmed or not. But it will be interesting to see how they did that and why it took them so long. Because obviously it was released a good 8-9 months ago now. And obviously the Missing Years, I'm really intrigued about, just to see not only them saying, oh, there's only 110, there's never going to be less than 110 missing ones, but also because sort of to see the evolution of VAM in physical media. It'll be quite interesting to see.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a fascinating document. I watched it probably about 3 or 4 years ago now. I watched the Lost in Time version of that documentary, and I always think those sort of things are fascinating as well. And when you see these people who come on and say, as we say with Ian Levine and the likes, that sort of sense of these people we're watching at that time, never thought they'd see the Web of Fear in full again, or pretty much, or the Enemy of the World and things. And so now now we've actually got that chance. I think it's just always these sort of exciting feelings you get from that point of view as well. And so I think overall, I think maybe our enthusiasm has been slightly dampened by the animation, but it's still really nice that we're actually getting a proper special edition of the Web of Fear. And I think to an extent we probably should look at it as much as anything else, because obviously a couple of years ago we had the Enemy of the World special edition, whereas when these first came out back in, I think it was late 2013, wasn't it? They basically just released the stories on a DVD. I think did they do a commentary? I think they did a commentary. I can't actually remember. I think did they not do a commentary?
that with the original releases, they didn't have any features
Literally
whatsoever.
nothing.
I think it was just one trailer for like the other story, and that was basically it. They didn't do really anything until the special editions.
Exactly, yeah. So I think it's great just to have a more full DVD release for these stories, because we're so used to these great releases of the DVD range, and now with the Blu-ray collection range, it's great to kind of just tick off some of these new stories. Like, I don't know anything about the making of the Web of Fear. I haven't really looked into it very much, so it'll be all new information to me to find out how they actually made the original story, as well as obviously making the animation. So yeah, overall, are you guys looking forward to August the 16th and getting stuck into the animation and the release?
Yeah, I'd say I am. I think, although the animation isn't the best, it will be very interesting to see that episode in full. Is it better or worse than the things we've saw? We've yet to see, and obviously the VAM I'm looking forward to. I'm definitely going to watch probably that Missing Years documentary first, and maybe even before the actual episode itself. Who knows? Because I'm very looking forward to that. What about you, Ryan?
Exactly the same. I mean, I'm looking forward to just for the chance to revisit the Web of Fear, because, as I said, it's one of my favorite stories of the 60s. And I think I've been looking forward to that more than the animation itself, which, of course, I have my own feelings about. It'd be interesting to see if it's actually not that bad, or if it might end up taking the spot as the worst animation. I mean, who knows? It could go either way at this point.
Exactly. I think that's going to be the big question, and something to look forward to when, as we say, the Web of Fear gets released on the 16th of August. I think they're doing DVD and Blu-ray, and I think they're doing a steelbook, aren't they, as well, of this release. So there's many different options to be able to enjoy it. And of course, in a podcast at some point down the line after that, we'll have a good discussion about it, I'm sure, and get stuck into the detail of that animation and whether it really was any good or not when we come around to it. So before we get into our other main talking point, which is of course season 24, what have you guys been watching? Has it mainly just been the season 24 stories? Have you guys been watching any other Doctor Who recently, or any VAM recently?
For me, it's basically just been rewatching all 4 season 24 stories, and it's definitely been a very fascinating journey, to say the least. Charlie, what about you?
Season 24 I watched pretty much like in the week straight after KerVAM 3, and since then I haven't watched much because of mocks and stuff, but I did start watching Frontier in Space.
Great story.
I really love Frontier in Space. I think it's brilliant.
It's great.
Yeah.
I just love the Pertwee era in general, to be fair. Just I will always pick it up. But Frontier in Space, it's just this great sort of space soap opera, kind of, they're jumping around these different spaceships with the Master, and the Draconians getting involved, and you spend episodes where the humans think it's Draconians think the humans are the villains, and it's great. It's great fun. And then the Daleks turn up in the last episode as well. Spoiler alert. It's great fun. Yeah. It's great fun.
I mean, Frontier in Space is a good one. I mean, the only thing that's a little bit annoying is the fact that the Doctor and Jo keep ended up bang up in prison constantly throughout the story. But apart from that, that's like the only issue I have with it. Apart from that, as I said, it is great. Just see the Draconian Empire and just how the Ogrons factor into it, and the Master. It's just it is a great story, and I mean it is. I mean the John Pertwee era is just amazing anyway. So more of that is just absolutely wonderful to me.
Exactly. I think and you mentioned the getting captured in prisons thing. I feel like that's just a classic way to pad out a Doctor Who story from 4 episodes to 6, isn't it? To just add a couple more escape capture little scenes where they escape one prison and end up in another, just to drag the story along an episode or two. But that's what we love. We love Doctor Who for that. The classic series is always great for those kind of things, isn't it? Really. So, well, brilliant. Well, of course we've got to get back onto the the other main talking point of today, which is of course the season 24 box set, which unsurprisingly got delayed for a start. We were supposed today was supposed to be the day we're all enjoying it, but we're not. We've got to wait another week. It's now being released on the 28th of June rather than the 21st, but that's better than a lot of the previous releases, which were 2 or 3 week delays. I think about 7 out of 9 of them have been delayed by 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So only a week is we're improving. It's great. So it's always exciting to have another collection release. It's the first one we've had since season 8, which came out in March of this year. And of course, we also don't know anything about the next collection release as of yet. Hopefully this means we'll also get a trailer or some sort of indication of that at some point soon as well. But today, we're focusing on season 24. And well, guys, of course, when we found out, a while back now, I think it was it January? I think it was January, wasn't it, when we first got the trailer? Yeah. it's been a while. What were your guys' first impressions when you heard that season 24 was going to be released on Blu-ray? I mean, it's obviously not a fan favorite, but what were your guys' sort of thoughts on it? Ryan, you first.
Well, in a way, it's very similar to how my reaction is how when they first announced season 23 a couple of years ago, I was just shocked considering that it was that middle period of the 80s with seasons 22, 23, and 24 are commonly regarded as the worst seasons of Doctor Who, but just the fan reception isn't great, shall we say, in terms of those 3 seasons. So when they announced season 24, I was just completely shocked, but I was just like, well, we were bound to get another Sylvester McCoy season on Blu-ray eventually, and I thought they were going to do season 25, considering that's more popular with stories like Happiness Patrol, Remembrance of the Daleks, obviously, and Greatest Show in the Galaxy. So, yeah, season 24 was a surprise, to say the least.
Indeed. Charlie, what about you? What was your first thoughts when we heard about this release?
From the makers of this range's standpoint, it makes a lot of sense considering when they do the last collection box set, they're going to want to do a really popular season, like say, I don't know, 7 or maybe even season 1 or season 5 or something like that. So getting a really badly received season out of the way makes a lot of sense, really, I think. And overall, I don't really mind season 24. But at the same time, I wasn't extremely surprised when I saw that they'd done a trailer for it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, it's as we say, with the collection release, every season's got to be released at some point. So I guess we shouldn't be massively surprised that they came to season 24. And I feel like it's that case of not wanting to leave all the dodgy ones until the end and spreading them in between some of the better sort of more popular and bigger seller ones, because probably a release like this does not sell as much as certainly a Tom Baker season 14 did last year, and probably a John Pertwee season 8. I somehow think that this is selling less, so the profit's probably less on a release like this. So you've got to kind of balance those, I'm sure, against the more popular releases to be able to have the right budget for every release. I'm sure there's a balancing act to be had there. And of course, as you mentioned, Charlie, it's also that point of wanting to have a really good season to be the final one in 6-7 years time when we finally get to it. I personally think it'd be quite fun if they did season 13 last, because Terror of the Zygons was basically the last DVD release, and so it'd be nice to kind of have that symmetry of season 13, of course, containing Terror of the Zygons being the last of the Blu-ray releases. But I'm sure that won't dictate it. I just think it'd be quite a nice bit of symmetry there. But yeah, of course, this release is, as always, action-packed with new features and new things on it. Let me have a look what we've got, because I can't actually remember it all off the top of my head, so I'm going to have a look at some notes here, because there's too much stuff to really think about. It's worth noting that obviously this release, like season 23, features extended versions of all the stories. They basically have chucked back in all the sort of deleted scenes, the scenes from the sort of the studio footage and all that. They kind of re-edited it all back in together to create longer versions of it, which means that every story has basically 2 discs for each of them, because there's 4 stories, 8 discs, which is fantastic, really. The amount of extra content you get there from that point of view in terms of those extended stories, which I know are big and quite popular for some people. I don't mind it. Part of me kind of enjoys more watching the original stories and then watching the sort of deleted scenes. I kind of enjoy that more, but I also don't mind sometimes tackling some of the extended versions as well. I don't know, what do you guys prefer? Do you tend to watch the sort of original transmitted versions, or do you quite enjoy the extended episodes when we get them?
Go on, right?
I think well, it's really depending on the story, really. I remember when we got Battlefield, which I think is an underrated story and definitely deserves a lot more praise than it does. I remember watching the extended movie version of that, and I remember enjoying it just that little bit more than the original transmitted version. So I think it's just a case of which story it works best for. You could have an extended version for, say, I thought the extended versions of Trial of a Time Lord just kind of felt a bit dragging, whereas if you look at Battlefield, I felt like it benefited with those extra scenes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Charlie?
I do agree, Ryan. Some stories are absolutely suited to more of a film sort of, extended, longer runtime format. And Yeah, I think if in a marathon context, like if I'm watching them in a marathon, back to back, then I probably wouldn't watch the extended scenes
Mm.
because, viewers back in the 60s, 70s, 80s didn't. But if I'm getting one off the shelf, I will probably see extended scenes just because, it's more Doctor Who.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's always the interesting thing, sort of, it's great to have these extended things. I think it's great that they're on there and it's great they do them. They do the 5.1 soundtracks for them because Mark Ayres is just, a genius and crazy and brilliant. And he does 5.1s, not just on the normal stories, but the extended ones as well. It's bonkers. But I think it's that thing of, there's a reason that these scenes were cut out of the episodes. I know part of it is sometimes for time, but also some of these scenes were cut out simply because they weren't very interesting. And so I think that's where, Ryan, as you say, for some extended episodes it works, some it doesn't. Like, do we really need another, I don't know, 10 minutes more of time in the Rani? I guess we'll find out. But somehow I think we maybe don't. And I can't imagine that, that 10 extra minutes is going to save that story. As it were. I don't know. Maybe my perception will be changed when we watch it, but I don't know. We'll see. But I think that's always the interesting thing with the sort of extended episodes that we get. So of course, as I mentioned, we also have the 5.1 soundtracks on everything, and I think isolated scores as well. So you can kind of listen to an audio track that's literally just the music and nothing else. If that sort of is of interest to you, I prefer to kind of rip them off the discs and listen to them separately. And then we've also got a making of documentary for Delta and the Bannerman, because I know that was one of the few, it's ticking off one of the few stories in Classic Who that didn't have a making of documentary. And I'm pretty sure, wasn't there quite a lot of production problems around Delta and the Bannerman as well, which lends itself to having quite an interesting documentary. I don't know, do either of you guys know more about that?
I haven't heard that much about it. I mean, this is pretty much the first time I heard there were sort of production problems. So it'd be interesting to see with this documentary just what those problems are, because watching the story, I would be very surprised if there was any production problems with that story.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just feel like I heard something about it. I don't know. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but
Yeah. I think if any of them have production problems, it was probably like, I don't know, Time in the Rani or Dragonfire, probably. Those were definitely more flawed in production than, say, Delta and the Bannermen of Paradise Towers. But yeah, I'm still looking forward to it because, like I said, when I was watching these DVDs, I watched most of the VAM as well, and I was a bit surprised when I got to Delta and the Bannermen, and there wasn't really much VAM there.
Yeah, exactly. I think what's great about these collection and releases is it kind of can fill in those gaps where there wasn't the money, or they just didn't decide to do a making of a particular story, and now there's that opportunity to kind of cover that off all over again. So that's really cool. And I think that another great feature they've got a sort of overview of the season, basically called Here's to the Future, which I imagine is kind of an hour long or whatever documentary covering basically the whole production of this season, because I think it's also was one of the most difficult seasons of sort of producing it at the time, off the back of the hiatus with season 23 and a whole new production team coming in and a new Doctor and everything. There was a lot of change at the time, and I think a lot of reasons behind the scenes why sometimes the stories weren't as brilliant on screen as maybe we would like. And so I think it's kind of really nice that a season that's so kind of maligned by a lot of the fandom is hopefully going to have a brilliant documentary basically explaining that and maybe helping us to kind of warm to it a little bit more, kind of knowing some of the problems that it had behind the scenes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the production team, I think John Nathan Turner especially was going up against a lot of odds. I mean,
Indeed.
He had the big falling out with Eric Saywood after season 23, and BBC sacking Colin Baker unceremoniously, and so he was left without a production, without a script editor, without a doctor, and he only had like a few months left to kind of try and put it all together for a season that he wasn't really planning on being a producer of, because he was planning on leaving after season 23, but they just forced him to stay on. So it definitely was a very troubled period during that time. And I think if you look at the beginning of Time in the Rani, those first few minutes, it clearly it kind of is a reflection of the problems that were going on during that time.
Exactly. I think it really, really shows in some of the stories, and I think that a documentary like this will just hopefully shed that bit more light on it, I think, which will be really good as well. So kind of next up, we, as often these releases do, and particularly this release has a ridiculous amount of studio footage on it, because I think basically all of the studio and location footage tapes pretty much exist from this season. And so I think the press release says we have over 25 hours of studio footage and location footage, which itself is crazy when it's 4 stories. So that's what, six hours on 6 hours a story basically, which is crazy. And I think apparently that's not even all of it. Like it's like twice of that actually exists. So just seeing that much of an insight into how the story is made, as much as I think we've talked about before, how it's not necessarily our favorite feature on the thing, it's still kind of interesting and can be good background viewing as well. I think, Charlie, do you find that sort of, it's more interesting background viewing maybe than really focusing on it?
Yeah, like for the studio footage on the DVDs, I will have it on just because some of it, especially like the bloopers and stuff, it's a bit funny sometimes. But there was no way I would sit and watch just 3 hours of studio footage. I do something else.
Yeah,
as well.
Exactly. I get you. So that was the next thing. Again, we get all the behind the sofa, of course, as we always do with this. And the 2 sofas this time, I believe, are Sylvester McCoy, Bonnie Langford. Is it 3 sofas? I can't remember. I know all the contributors, but I can't remember who it is. I mean, we've got the classic duo of trio of Peter Davison, Janet Fielding, and Sarah Sutton. We can't keep Janet Fielding away from her behind the sofa, can we? She's on every single one, near enough, to share her, words of wisdom or something. And
I remember seeing the trailer. Peter Davison was just watching something in absolute horror. It's like, what is this am I watching? So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say.
Yeah, I think having people who didn't work on it watching it and weren't part of that era, I think, given the reputation of the stories, which I'm sure they must have some awareness of going into it, that this season's known for not being very good. I'm sure they're at least somewhat aware of that. And so that's naturally going to colour their opinions watching it, I would imagine. And so, yeah, for them, it'll be quite interesting. I know they've got Colin Baker and Michael Jaston, who, of course, play the Valley Yard. They've also come on to watch it, along with Sylvester McCoy, Bonnie Langford, and Sophie Aldred. So a good set of people on it, I think, and it'll be quite an interesting watch.
Yeah, I think about that, Elliot. Colin Baker and Michael Jaston, but Colin Baker especially, I think, will be really interesting, considering, like, Colin Baker, he was literally sacked and then replaced with Sylvester McCoy, and this is the season that followed. So I can imagine he must have been pretty bitter at the time. But it'll be interesting to see his opinions now.
It's going to be fascinating. When he was sitting there slagging it off, going, "Oh, I could have done so much better if I was the Doctor in this season. That's why it's awful, is because it's not me." Somehow, Colin's a nice guy. I don't think he'll be quite like that. But I'm just interested to see if there'll be any sort of, slightly sort of, more cynicism towards the season because he wasn't in it when maybe he should have been. That's a really interesting point, and I'm really interested to see what that'll be like, actually.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how Colin's going to react to those first few minutes of Tam and the Rani.
Indeed, yes, seeing his regeneration that he wasn't even a part of. I'm sure he'll have a story to tell about that, which will be fascinating to see, I think, really. So just covering off some of the other features, we've got the In Conversation, the classic sort of, Matthew Sweet interview with this one with Sylvester McCoy, of course, as is kind of become the standard, the first season of every Doctor. We get the Doctor on to talk about it. Well, and I guess this ticks all of them now, doesn't it? Oh, no, not Colin. We haven't had Colin. We've done Peter, we've done Tom, we've done Peter, and this will be Sylvester, and we'll just be waiting for Colin's first season to do that because, of course, we sadly can't have the first 3 Doctors to be interviewed. So they're always interesting. I think it's always... I just find Matthew Sweet always finds a new avenue to talk about, a new sort of opportunity, something different, a new angle to come at, which I think is always really, really interesting. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that will bring as well. Then alongside that, the Doctor's Table. Have you guys? I don't know if I actually ever got around to watching it, but have you ever watched the Doctor's Table feature they've done on the previous collection releases? Ryan, have you ever had a chance to watch those?
I vaguely remember. I think it was on season 23.
I think it was, yeah. I think it was 23, wasn't it? Where they had Colin and was it Nicola Bryan and some people like that.
Langford and Michael Jaston.
That was it. Yes, that was it. And it's sort of like a sort of, they sit and have a meal and have a sort of chat and get asked questions and stuff. I think it's that sort of vibe, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's what they're going to be doing for the 80s releases. I imagine that for the Peter Davison one, I think they're going to do one for him and all his companions. I think that's definitely the table, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It makes sense to do it for them as well. And I'm sure there'll be some interesting stuff to come out of it. It says it's got Sylvester McCoy, Bonnie Langford, Sophie Aldred, and Clyde Marison. I can't actually remember who Clyde Marison played in this season. Can you guys remember who he played while I quickly Google it?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was, I can't even remember his name. He wasn't too memorable. He was the guy from Dragonfire, the villain.
Actually, he was in Paradise Towers. He plays
Oh.
the deputy chief caretaker in
Yes.
Paradise Towers.
Yeah.
So he was part of that story. So I guess they kind of just wanted to find a fourth person and tried to find somebody who would be interesting and kind of knows them, I guess, a little bit. Because I feel like it kind of makes sense with Michael Jaston, because obviously in season 23 he was in all the stories, so it made sense to have him as a part of that. But I guess when you haven't got any other characters or any actors that were in a lot of the stories, it's kind of difficult to find, any additional ones. So I don't know. Hopefully that'll be an interesting feature. I don't really know. It's a Chris Chapman, I think, who's producing it, so that always usually means it's quite a good one. So I guess we'll just have to watch it and wait and see, really. And then finally, just covering off the last few things, there's an interview with what's called An Audience with Lady Stevens, a brand new interview with season 24 actor and Rocky Horror cult figure Patricia Quinn. Which story was Patricia Quinn in now? I really should know these things. I feel like I'm coming across as a really bad Doctor Who fan.
She was in Dragonfire, I believe.
That's it. Yes, she was in that, wasn't she? Exactly. I think she's quite a famous sort of cult sort of sci-fi actor and horror actor, wasn't she? Actress. So I think those sort of things are always quite interesting. I feel like it was produced by a slightly I remember seeing something on Twitter about it, and it's kind of similar to the interview we had with what was his name? The chap in season 14 who's in Talons of Weng Chiang. I can't remember his name. Was it Deep Roy? Was that his name? I think it was something like that. Yes, it was Deep Roy, yes, who they did a sort of 10-15 minute little interview with him on season 14, which was quite interesting. Sort of, I think they sent a sort of separate production team to who normally do Doctor Who things to go and interview him about Doctor Who and his life and things. And so I think we're going to get something of a similar vein with this as well, which is, I always find those things reasonably interesting, and get a bit of archive footage from different programs and that sort of stuff is always quite good. And then the final kind of major thing really on this, which when you look at DWM, Doctor Magazine, do the disc breakdowns where they release basically everything that's going to be on the discs, the sort of existing special features, what's new and whatever. And when you look at disc 1, Time on the Rani, the first disc, there is a ridiculous amount of pieces of archive interviews with Sylvester McCoy and the cast and stuff. There's probably about 15 different sort of interviews and archive things from that time just on disc 1, because I think we've kind of got to the seasons where they did a lot of TV appearances and they all exist, and so let's just chuck them on the disc. And so there's going to be huge amounts of Sylvester McCoy being interviewed to listen to if you like that kind of thing, which some of them are more interesting than others, I feel like sometimes. I don't know, what do you guys get much out of those archive interviews sometimes?
Well, I mean, I think it's just kind of, again, depend on the interview. Sometimes it can go one way, sometimes the other. I mean, I imagine they wanted to go all out, considering that, well, given everything that happened with season 23, they were like, look, we need to sell this new Doctor. We need to get him out there. We need to show that this season is going to be amazing. We need to win the audience back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it depends, obviously, on the interviewer and the interviewee, but I feel like for lots of them, then if you've seen one, you've seen them all, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's that case of they've been given the PR line to go and say about the show to all the media, and they just say the same thing over and over again, the same story about how I got the role or something, or the first day on set or whatever, and just kind of repeat it over and over again. So when you watch sort of 3 or 4 of them in quick succession, you're kind of like, oh yeah, I've already heard that anecdote twice already. It's kind of getting a bit repetitive here. But it's just the nature of those kind of things, and I think it's still really nice to have those archive features as well. I certainly wouldn't want them to get rid of it, because it just gives you that little sort of time capsule and feel like you're being transported back to 1987 to watch all of these things, which is really, really interesting. And I also think that if and when in the future we get to having New Who releases of the collection range, the amount of archive interviews and the sort of, particularly like the RTD era, the amount of people who were interviewed on chat shows and stuff that they can chuck onto those collection releases is going to be crazy. I mean, I know most of them are probably, quite frankly, on YouTube now, but to get them all sort of properly on releases, I think is going to be brilliant when we get to that. Hopefully, get to that point in probably a few years from now. But that's still something to look forward to as well. And one other little thing I noted, which I thought was really, really interesting on this first disc, is they've managed, I don't know quite how, but they've got hold of the audition tapes for the Seventh Doctor, for different people who were going to play the Seventh Doctor. It was obviously for Sylvester, but also Dermot Crawley and David Fielder, which I think is going to be fascinating to watch. Basically, the tape they recorded of themselves performing and trying to get the role. That I've never seen anything like that before. I don't know. Were you guys interested in that?
I remember seeing clips of these on the documentary on Time of the Rani DVD called Last Chance Saloon, I think. They just showed little clips where
Yeah.
they were acting opposite Janet Fielding. She was there
Okay.
sort of as the standee, and I'm also interested in the behind the sofa if Janet Fielding recalls this and recalls being involved in the audition process and in the casting of the Seventh Doctor. So that's going to be interesting to see that, and also again just to see the actual full audition tape, to see it full instead of just little bits and pieces.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it'll be pretty interesting just to see, like, you know, these people could have been the Doctor. You know, imagine a world where Sylvester wasn't and these people were. You know, will the show have been cancelled earlier, later? We don't really know.
Yeah, it sort of it transports us into a slight alternative world, doesn't it? Where something could have been so very different. And I enjoy those things they do sometimes on the DVD releases, like the Missing Season 20. Was it the Missing Season 23 or 24? When there was all those stories that were never produced, and then we got Trial of the Time Lord instead. I remember there was a documentary about that was fascinating. This sort of, which became, I think, the Lost Stories that Big Finish then remade a lot of. And it's just fascinating, that alternative idea of where Doctor Who could have been if it wasn't cancelled, if it had all happened differently or whatever. I think those things are always a very interesting part of it. So that's pretty much all I can find of new stuff on the release. I don't know, have you guys spotted anything else that sounds particularly interesting, or anything that was already on the DVDs that you think is going to be interesting to have another look at?
Well, the one thing new feature that I'm looking forward to is of course the new documentary for Delta and the Bannermen, just to see in full that story, just what the thought process was in making this weird, bizarre story that I feel is an underrated guilty pleasure of mine.
Yes.
Yeah. Honestly, I can't think of anything else really. Obviously, I'm really excited for the holiday camp documentary. I will be watching the archive footage when I get this, but probably, not to my fullest extent. And
indeed.
Yeah, and probably the behind the sofas as well, especially Colin Baker's.
Yeah, exactly. They're always interesting ones, aren't they? All those kind of things. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be another fantastic release. I think, it's the sort of season where, because the stories aren't necessarily that great, it needs to be supplemented by a lot of great VAM as well to kind of really make it worth the selling price and make it, really worth it. And I think looking at the list of stuff we've got there, like, I'm going to be entertained for hours and hours and hours watching this stuff. There's so much on there, so much to enjoy, even if the stories themselves aren't always your favourite things. So I personally am really looking forward to getting a hold of this release and getting stuck into lots of the features on it. So that's pretty much wraps us up for this edition of KerVAM. A slightly shorter one than usual, but I thought we'd keep it a little bit more brief this week, as we only had these two things to talk about, and I'm sure we'll go a little bit more in depth next time, because in a couple of weeks' time, I think we're aiming for the 5th of July, something like that. In a couple of weeks or so, once season 24's come out next week, the 28th of June, we've all had some time to get stuck into some of it and have a watch of some of it and be able to talk about it. Then we'll be back with a new edition of KerVAM to be able to dissect, discuss, look at what was great about the release, celebrate it really, because I obviously, if there's criticism needed, we will criticize it, as we kind of did with the animation earlier of Web of Fear, but I feel like it's going to be a great release, and I'm just really looking forward to, we only really get 3 of these a year at best, so to have that time come round again is always very, very exciting. So I hope you guys will be able to join us next time for that particular podcast. But have you guys, Ryan and Charlie, had fun today? You looking forward to the release next week?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think that's going to be my highest priority of collection box set to get. Mm-hmm. I might even just get it on its release. I don't really know. They're probably out of stock by now, but if I have £200 spare for eBay, then
stock on Amazon, so I think there's still time to pick it up from.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's still available on Amazon at the moment, actually, as we speak on the week before. I guess, as we mentioned earlier, it's just simply not quite as popular a season, so it's not been released yet. But it's not gone out of stock yet, I should say. So you might still be able to pick it up.
Yeah, I might yet actually. It's I'm definitely looking forward to it, considering how much of a mixed season it was.
Exactly. And you, Ryan?
Yeah, same. I mean, I'm definitely interested in revisiting the set, but with the new features, because I don't think it quite deserves the harsh criticism. I mean, as I said, it is a mixed bag. I mean, I'm a defender of Paradise Towers, and Delta and the Bannermen, as I've said many times, is a guilty pleasure of mine. The other 2 stories, not so much, but as I said, I think there is just as much good in it as there is bad, shall we say.
Indeed, exactly. I think that's a good note to probably end it on, isn't it? That there's as much good as there is bad, indeed, with season 24. And so, just quickly to wrap up what's coming up in terms of releases of Doctor Who, we've got, of course, season 24 coming out next Monday, June the 28th. We've got the re-releases of season 10 and season 18 coming out on the 5th of July. And at some point, a little bit after that, we'll have more of an in-depth chat about those two box sets as well. Because I think they're, we never obviously got to cover them previously, and they're really cracking box sets as well. We also know of The Web of Fear coming out on the 16th of August, another release we've finally got a date for, and I'm sure there will be another collection box set announced somewhere soon, and you never know, maybe even another animation to discuss at some point in the future. But apart from that, I hope you have all enjoyed this edition of KerVAM, our 4th episode already. We're really flying through. We'll be back in a couple of weeks or so for episode 5. Please go follow us on Twitter at KerVAMPod if you want to find out the latest news and updates on what's going on. We're now available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so do go check us out on there if you haven't, and give us a follow or a subscribe, or I can't even remember what the different buttons are for all different streaming services. It's too complicated. But go and follow us on there. Just search for KerVAM or Doctor Who KerVAM, something like that, and you'll find it. Especially if you're watching on YouTube at the moment and want a more easy way to listen to it as a podcast, then go and check it out over there as well. But apart from that, I hope you've all enjoyed it, and we'll be back again very soon for the next edition of KerVAM.